Welcome to the 5th annual Frank P. Zeidler Memorial Lecture. Jeanne Zeidler honors her father's legacy, remembering former Mayor Frank P. Zeidler on the 100th anniversary of his birth. The lecture was recorded on September 20th, 2012 at the Milwaukee Public Library's Centennial Hall. Here is Library Director Paula Kiely.
Good evening, and welcome to the Milwaukee Public Library and the annual Frank P. Zeidler Memorial Lecture. Frank Zeidler was a great friend and a frequent visitor to the Central Library, using the library throughout his life, entrusting us with his papers, which are archived in the Frank P. Zeidler Humanities Room, and enriching our entire community with his care, commitment, and humanity. It is indeed an honor to host this event. It is my pleasure to begin the evening by introducing Kathleen Dunn, who will introduce this year's honored speaker. Kathleen Dunn is a self-described child of the 60s. Joining WGN Radio and TV in Chicago, after graduating from the University of Iowa, she turned down her first opportunity to be a reporter with the station, instead opting for a stint in Vista, followed by a hitchhiking tour around Europe and teaching school as a substitute teacher in the Chicago suburbs. Searching for a way to improve the world, she took her Volkswagen Bug on the road looking for a job in an alternative school. When her car broke down in North Carolina, she found a job to help raise some cash at a counterculture radio station owned by Duke University, and her radio career was born. 3 years later, she joined WTMJ, where she remained until 1992. Today, Kathleen can be heard Monday through Thursday between 9 and 11 a.m. on the Wisconsin Public Radio's Ideas Network stations, leading balanced discussions of the issues of the day and of our time. A leading voice in Milwaukee, we listen to her on WHAD 90.7 FM. Please join me in welcoming Kathleen Dunn.
Where did you get that? It's amazing what you can find out about somebody these days. I forgot about that part of my life. Oh yeah, you haven't heard half the story. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I think that most everyone in this room has this in common, and that's that we consider Frank Zeidler to be among our top 5 deeply admired public servants, and for many, our most admired Milwaukee public servant. And we also, yes, he was quite a man. I also consider it, and I mean this sincerely, an honor to be here celebrating what would have been his 100th birthday. His daughter Anita tells me he liked angel food cake, so put that on your list of things to do for tonight or sometime in the next few days to celebrate his birthday. And we also have a chance to listen to his daughter Jeanne, who's also a former mayor and a much admired public servant. We meet in this beautiful library and remember that he helped build branch libraries in this wonderful community. And every time I met with Frank, he was carrying his latest research, gathered, I'm certain, from hours in libraries that he frequented. Around his 80th birthday, I seem to have marked all of the decades with Frank, 80 and 90 and now 100. We had a radio interview, and he always came a little early, and we would chat for a while. And I noticed that he was carrying, as he always did, a whole lot of papers, and he had some medical books with him. And I said, "Frank, what are all of these for?" And he said, "Only Frank would be doing this. I'm studying what happens to the body when it enters the 9th decade." Seriously, that's what he said. What are the changes that take place, and how can I stay healthy? And on his 90th birthday, which many of you I'm sure were there, it was a marvelous birthday party at the Italian Community Center, I realized that all that study had paid off because he was pretty vital well into his 90s. Those who had the privilege of driving him home after an event like a radio interview were given a not-to-be-surpassed history lesson of the city that he did so much to build. To remember him in a way that most of us can't because she grew up with him, Jeanne Zeidler is with us tonight. The apple has not fallen far. A Virginia newspaper profile piece on her asked this question: who could have predicted that her upbringing as the daughter of a respected socialist politician in Milwaukee would have prepared Jeanne Zeidler for elective office in conservative Virginia? I would say that the answer is straightforward. She could have been elected anywhere, and her father could have been elected anywhere as well. She said, "My father's socialism was directed toward people and services for people, and the issues that I grew up with that were important to my father are important to the people of Williamsburg today. Public schools, quality education, good libraries, parks, cultural, recreational opportunities, fiscal conservatism, good transportation services, and good public policy." Jeanne was mayor of Williamsburg, the first female mayor in 1998. She was elected and she served for 12 years as her father served 12 years mayor of Milwaukee. She signed on to the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement and has spoken widely about global warming. She was concerned with land use planning, ridership on the bus system, bikeways, walking to work, public parks, watershed protection, and of course, public education. She'd been elected to the Williamsburg City Council for many years, also served on the City County School Board, president of the Williamsburg Rotary Club, holds memberships in the NAACP, the Williamsburg Area League of Women Voters, the Greater Williamsburg Area Chamber of Commerce. She directed the emergence to national prominence of a Museum of African American Art. For many years, she has worked with museums, cultural, and educational institutions. She's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She received her Master of Arts in History Education from the College of William and Mary. She is currently the president and CEO of the Williamsburg, Virginia Community Health Foundation, which supports nonprofit programs working to improve the health of citizens in the greater Williamsburg region. She's here with her husband, Ed Krapel, PhD, University of Wisconsin-Madison as well, and a history professor, retired from College of William and Mary. And all of her sisters are here. If you want to wave your hands, I've met many of them tonight. They're terrific. Several cousins are here, and a niece and a nephew. Please welcome Mayor Zeidler.
Good evening, everyone. Kathleen, thank you so much for that introduction. It is quite amazing what people can learn about you on the internet. But I am honored to present the 5th annual Frank P. Zeidler Lecture today on Dad's 100th anniversary of his birth. And thank you to the lecture committee for this opportunity to reflect upon my father's life and his legacy. I have to begin by confessing that I'm not a historian of Milwaukee, nor am I an expert on urban development or American politics in the 20th century. Any of those things would be useful when talking about Frank Zeidler. But I do know a lot about Dad. I followed his record of civic engagement and his record of public service, and I followed him into public service. But most importantly for tonight, I am one of the few in this room who has unlimited access to the family photo albums and a century's worth of photographs. So tonight, I'm going to use, I said some, but a lot of family photographs and a lot of images from public and private archives to illustrate this talk. I think that while the images that I've selected will provide evidence for the Frank Zeidler narrative that is familiar to many of us, these images also contain a few surprises, some dimensions of him that are not so well known or appreciated. And why is this valuable in 2012? Because Frank Zeidler believed that our nation's cities, like the city of Milwaukee, are places where people can prosper and can lead fulfilling lives. He believed that government has a positive role to play to help citizens achieve their potential. The way, In his own words, he put it this way: "The purpose of a city is solely to advance human progress. A city should help as many of its inhabitants as possible, even to the point of being substantially taxed." This is a view that was not universally shared in his lifetime, and it's certainly not shared by all now. However, it is a philosophy that led Frank to champion social, economic, and racial equity, to fight for improved housing, transportation, and public services, to expand cultural and educational opportunities, and to preserve employment opportunities and the city's tax base. These were the vehicles he found to advance human progress. And so in Williamsburg, our goal is, quote, "that the future may learn from the past." And so I hope that this look at Frank Zeidler's life and legacy will help guide us to a better, fairer, and a more inclusive future. I do want to thank the Milwaukee Public Library, especially Virginia Schwartz and the staff of the Frank P. Zeidler Humanities Collection, who have been very generous with their time. I also want to thank the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel for permission to use images from their collection. Their photos often duplicated in our family photo albums. And I want to thank my brother and sisters for allowing me to use the more private family materials. Most of the professionally produced images that you will see tonight, including this great one of Dad from about 2001, were taken by Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel photographers. But the pictures that look more like snapshots, they were produced by family and friends. The photographic resources are rich, and with them, I'm going to illustrate a little about my father's background, look at the challenges confronting Milwaukee when he was mayor, follow him after public office, and conclude with some observations about his approach to community and to personal responsibility. And in so doing this, I will also recognize our mother, Agnes Zeidler, because she and Frank were a team. Frank Zeidler was elected mayor of Milwaukee on April 12, 1948, over a field of 14 candidates, including future Mayor Henry Meyer and future Congressman Henry Royce. The party at the Turner Hall that evening was jubilant. Dad was 35 years old when this crowd hoisted him on their shoulders, and I have to say, I always thought this was a strange photograph because the father I knew didn't get on other people's shoulders. Also at the party were my mom and my father's parents, Michael W. Zeidler and Clara Nitschke Zeidler. Grandpa was a barber with a shop on 16th and Clybourne, Grandma a homemaker. The family attended the Evangelical Lutheran Church of the Redeemer at 19th and Wisconsin Avenue, where Mom and Dad remained members throughout their marriage. Frank was the youngest of three boys, Carl, Clem, and Frank, pictured in 1924 outside the family home at 504 North 33rd Street. The boys had a younger sister, Dorothy, who I suspect snapped this picture. Merrill Park, the neighborhood in which Michael and Clara Zeidler raised their children, was predominantly Irish as the Zeidler children were growing up, and Dad told stories about being German in an Irish neighborhood. I think that experience gave him the appreciation for cultural differences and minority groups that characterized his work all his life. Frank was a very proud 1929 graduate of West Division High School. He was 16 years old when this graduation picture was taken, and so when his own children graduated from high school, he never failed to repeat some form of the joke. "How old are you?" 18, one of us would answer. When I was your age, I was 16, he would. At least he thought it was a joke. Dad originally wanted to be a Latin teacher. He started classes both at Marquette, where his two older brothers graduated, and at the University of Chicago. But ill health forced him to withdraw from both, and he never earned a formal college degree. Instead, he took course after course by correspondence from the University of Wisconsin Extension, including while he was mayor. He had an insatiable appetite for knowledge, and I think he probably accumulated at least the 120 credit hours needed for a normal college degree, but they were scattered among many different subjects to which his curiosity led him. One surprise from the family album is this 1929 photo. The man who became known for his opposition to militarism is in an Army uniform at Fort Sheridan, where he went for basic training. That experience also ended because of poor health. He was discharged due to a bout with rheumatic fever, and although he lived to be 93 years of age, he long suffered from what he termed a poor heart, perhaps because of this illness. During the 1930s, Dad worked as a farmhand and then as a surveyor for small businesses. During World War II, he worked with an engineering team on railroad projects for the Milwaukee Road. Pictured here in the front yard at 33rd Street, Frank lived only a couple of blocks from the neighborhood library. And during the 1930s, he spent hours reading at the Merrill Park branch of the Milwaukee Public Library. He studied the writings of Eugene Victor Debs and Norman Thomas, which led him to join the Socialist Party in the early 1930s. In his words, he was drawn to socialism, quote, because of several things in its philosophy. One was the brotherhood of people all over the world. Another was the equal distribution of economic goods. Another was the struggle for peace. Another, the ideal of cooperation. A fifth was the idea of democratic planning in order to achieve your goals. These were pretty good ideas, he concluded. So he became active in the Young People's Socialist League and other groups. One of his contributions was as a writer. He did some stories for the Milwaukee Leader, the city's socialist daily newspaper, as well as verses for the songs that a Young People's Peace Choir sang. Happily, that's how he met our mother. Agnes Ranke, the daughter of Lithuanian immigrants, had a beautiful singing voice. Here she is on Wisconsin Avenue in 1939. A year earlier, Dad went to the Socialist Meeting Hall on a day that Mom had arrived early. As a graduate of Milwaukee Girls Technical High School, she noticed that the windows were dirty, and so she decided to wash them. To properly clean the outside, she sat on the windowsill hanging out. Dad pulled her in because he thought it was dangerous, and that began their more than 67-year partnership. They married in 1939 and announced the union the following spring. Exactly why they eloped, I don't know, but I bet one reason was lack of money, and I bet another was that Mom's father, Emil Ranke, was not excited about a socialist, especially if that socialist courted his favorite daughter. But that's all another story. The more interesting question is how to explain this young man's election to the mayor's office 8 years later. I think many people believe that Dad benefited from sharing a last name with his popular older brother, Carl. There is certainly truth to that. Carl dazzled. It's evident from this photograph of him and Dad on the porch swing at their family home. Carl was tall, handsome, blonde, gregarious, had a beautiful singing voice. He was successful, athletic, and he was a bachelor. He joined every possible organization in town, and by all accounts, he lit up the room when he entered. Pictured here, giving his inaugural address, Carl was elected mayor in 1940 at age 32. He defeated Dan Hone, a socialist who had served for 24 years. Then, 2 years later, 2 years into Carl's four-year term, he resigned to join the war with service in the Naval Reserve. And 6 months after that, he was lost at sea when the supply vessel he was defending was torpedoed. There was an enormous sense of lost potential, and it lingered a long time. So being Carl's younger brother was an asset for the 1948 campaign, but not because voters thought they were getting Carl and Frank. As historian John Gerda pointed out, Carl and Frank were very different. Dad was a surveyor, not a lawyer. He was a socialist, and Carl was not. Moreover, Carl, as Gerda wrote, was, quote, the ultimate extrovert, while Frank seemed to attract terms like bookish and bespectacled. So I think attributing Frank's victory just to Carl's legacy ignores some important facts. One is that Dad had the support of a strong group that came to be called the Public Enterprise Committee, and I like that name. It conveys an important part of Dad's political perspective. Private enterprise is important to a strong economy, but when it cannot or will not meet the needs of a community and its people, public enterprise must step in. Attributing too much to Carl's legacy. Attributing too much to Carl's legacy also ignores some notable characteristics of my father. Dad was a very able politician, and by the time this 1948 campaign photo was taken, he had already run for office multiple times, including winning election as the county surveyor and 2 terms on the school board. Pictured here after the last meeting of that board, Frank Zeidler had made a name for himself in public service. In 1948, there was a record for voters to judge. Dad may not have been the ultimate extrovert, but he had other attributes that worked for him. He was an effective public speaker. He often spoke without notes, but never without a message. One bit of advice he gave me as I took public office was never to stand at a microphone without something thoughtful to say. For him, public speaking was the opportunity to educate the public on issues, and doing that promoted a higher level of community engagement. Frank was also a prolific public speaker. He gave speeches all the time, all over the place. Being visible and accessible is important in campaigns, but Dad continued that pattern throughout his time in public office and for many decades afterwards. When he was mayor, the 4th of July was the Super Bowl of his annual speech making. On that day, he started early, going by motorcade to public park after public park for neighborhood celebrations. And at each, he brought a little different message customized to that part of the city. One of Frank's strengths was a great sense of humor. He could delight an audience through laughter, but his rule about jokes was only to make fun of yourself, not others. So here's my favorite of his self-deprecating jokes. One day, when taking the 3rd Street bus to work at City Hall, seated in front of him were 2 citizens engaged in vigorous conversation about him. "That Zeidler," one of them said, "he is his own worst enemy." "Not while I'm alive," the other one shot back. Beyond presenting thoughtful and engaging speeches, Dad was effective because he did what he needed to do to connect with people. Here, blowing up balloons with children on July 4th, but also year-round at community events like German Day. He spent time talking with people, listening to their ideas and concerns, writing down notes to follow up in the little notebook he always carried. And today, we call that good constituent service. On the campaign trail, he could be good with photo opportunities. In 1956, what better place could a candidate look for votes in Milwaukee than a bowling alley? A couple of other images I came across, however, are head scratchers. This one, for example, I had to really study it to convince myself it was Dad. The man was so anti-guns and violence that toy guns were not welcome in our home unless it was a water pistol, and he didn't like them either. I have no idea the context for this photograph. And then there's this one, Frank riding a donkey on the 4th of July, 1948. And then this one, also 4th of July, 1948. It was clearly a different time, and I doubt he'd think much of this one now. But these are the silliest, or I think more accurately, the most surprising of the public images of that unassuming young man who was bookish and bespectacled. Not so silly are images like this one, which demonstrated how accessible he was to the press, not only by responding to all questions, but even by writing press releases to make their job easier. However, in 1948, one of Frank Zeidler's most potent campaign attributes was his family. With 6 young children, the attempts by other candidates to make an issue of Dad's socialism didn't get too far. The Zeidler family simply did not project a scary image. After watching the speakers at the Republican and Democratic conventions recently, and they all recounting their humbled origins, I see that my parents were ahead of their time again. This picnic table was really the kitchen table for the kids in 1948. But the winning campaign photo was this Milwaukee Journal photograph of the family walking down the street in their near North Side working class neighborhood, kids holding hands, parents with the smallest children in their arms. There's just really nothing threatening about this family man. The family theme was useful in other election campaigns. Here's Mom photographed for the 1952 campaign ironing, and at the refrigerator, and taking fresh bread from the oven. By the 1956 campaign, the children were all older, so those photographs included Dorothy taking the bread out of the oven, Clara helping Mom with the wash in the backyard, and me and Mary sneaking cookies off the top shelf where Mom hid them. My point here, Dad knew how to run a successful campaign, and I like this image as an example of that. These are the candidates for mayor in 1956. It was a bitter, hotly contested election that included personal attacks and ugly, racist whispering campaign. Dad was even criticized for not being a team player because he refused a salary increase when the Common Council accepted one. But in this photograph, the only candidate who looks approachable, engaged, and not grumpy is Frank Zeidler. So out of that group, who would you vote for? Dad was modest in his assessment of himself. Late in life, talking about his election in 1948, he said, "People voted for the person who could best move the snow out of Milwaukee." That simple statement is a great affirmation of the approach to local government that earned the Milwaukee Socialists the moniker sewer socialists. Originally a term of derision coined by other leftists whose politics were more revolutionary, Milwaukee socialists like Frank Zeidler embraced the term sewer socialists because it acknowledged their commitment to delivering quality municipal services to all. In fact, the sewer socialists voiced some disdain for their leftist critics, scoffing that they could never get elected to any public office. The other truth in Frank's comment about snow removal was that he probably was the best candidate to get the snow out. After all, he did come with the practical experience of serving as county surveyor, of working for small business, and for the Milwaukee Road, and he was well informed on urban issues. Mayor Zeidler found a host of issues confronting Milwaukee in 1948. Perhaps the most urgent was to upgrade the city's neglected infrastructure. More and improved housing topped the list, but not far behind was improved transportation, modernized utilities, and public safety. During the Great Depression and World War II, limited resources resulted in the deterioration of older homes like these on Walnut Street. The war put added pressure on housing as the city's manufacturing industry geared up for the war effort and its workforce needed housing. After the war, returning veterans swelled these numbers even more. My own parents could not find housing for their growing family in Milwaukee, and in the early 1940s, they rented a house in Watertown. Mom and the children stayed there, and Dad took the train into Milwaukee on Monday, returning on Friday. This is North Water Street in a photo taken for a blight elimination project. It shows the congested living conditions in the inner city, even near City Hall. So Frank Zeidler came into office promising to add 10,000 new affordable housing units, and 3 projects for veterans were built between 1948 and 1953, North Lawn, Berryland, and South Lawn, and 1 project for low-income residents, West Lawn, shown here at the groundbreaking. In 1948, Milwaukee voters passed a bond referendum to build those 3 projects for veterans, but public sentiment quickly shifted. Veterans projects had support, but workforce and low-income housing did not. Some feared that public housing attracted new residents who wanted to take advantage of that socialist housing. And soon, this issue became entangled in the racial politics of the time as African Americans moved into the city for employment in the robust manufacturing industry. This photograph depicts Mayor Zeidler presenting the keys to new homes on the Hillside Housing Project. Notably, the new residents are both African American and white families. Dad wouldn't allow public housing to be segregated. But momentum against public housing eventually blocked Frank's ambitious housing goal for low-income and middle-class working families. Another issue was transportation, and this photograph illustrates the problem. It was taken right near County Stadium, and its caption is really telling. Hawley Road, looking north, non-ball game day, Tuesday, May 5th, 1953, 4:59 p.m. 2 things are revealed in this photograph. More and more working people had access to automobiles for personal transportation, and more families were moving to the edge of the city to find housing. Here is the 3rd Street shopping district about 1950, and Wisconsin Avenue about the same time. It is obvious that these streets were planned for an earlier era of horse-drawn carriages and few cars. Dad, of course, was a longstanding advocate for public transportation. He never drove a car, and he used city buses regularly until he was nearly 90 years old. But he was also a realistic public administrator who recognized that changes were occurring, and so early in his tenure, he embraced the construction of the Milwaukee Freeway system. The People's Highway, he called it. He believed it would help get working people to their homes and their jobs safely and efficiently. Milwaukee also improved its mass transit system. encouraging its use as a convenient and less expensive alternative for some, while Milwaukee also accommodated increasing numbers of automobiles by installing parking meters, creating parking lots, and building parking structures. Simply put, when Frank Zeidler was in office, the city of Milwaukee modernized. These horse-drawn garbage wagons were retired and replaced by modern vehicles. Ground was broken for a new sports arena constructed next to the Civic Auditorium. New libraries were built. The main library on Wisconsin Avenue received a major addition. Dad called libraries the People's University, for they offered resources for self-education. A new public museum building was planned. The War Memorial and Art Center was constructed on the lakefront. And to accommodate the employees of a growing city, a new municipal building was built. And years later, it was named for Frank Zeidler, as shown in this photograph. But most exciting of all, in the 1950s, the Boston Braves made Milwaukee its hometown in 1953. And Dad worked hard to make that happen. And he played a role in the construction of County Stadium as their home field. Parades welcomed the team and celebrated their victories. The Milwaukee Braves are still legendary because of their many renowned players, including batting ace Henry Aaron. This team added immensely to the civic pride and national reputation, especially after they won the World Series in 1957, as recognized in this tribute on City Hall. Dad was a strong supporter of education, K-12 and beyond. Pictured here is the exchange of land agreements that brought the University of Wisconsin extension facilities to downtown. That move made its programs more accessible for citizens and positioned the extension to engage with the city in addressing pressing urban issues. But one of his proudest accomplishments was bringing a full-fledged 4-year public college to the city. His pride is evident when he received his first honorary degree from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. In 1959, the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway was a major international success. It supported Milwaukee's economic health for decades. And at the opening events, Mom and Dad were introduced to Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. The newspaper reported that when Dad said he was from Milwaukee, Prince Philip enthusiastically replied, "That's where they make beer." I do not know how my non-beer drinking, teetotaling dad took that, but public safety was modernized, even adding a new fireboat to protect Milwaukee's extensive lake and river fronts. The city also launched public information campaigns urging personal responsibility for health and safety, this one for safe vehicle and pedestrian travel. But Dad's concern for public safety came partly from his experience. A family member was killed by a car when Dad was young. Mom's mother was killed by a hit-and-run driver just after the birth of her first grandchild. And that grandchild, my sister Clara, pictured here in a hospital bed, was hit by a car a block from home in 1949. That same year, the Zeidler family benefited again from Milwaukee's first responders when, at Christmas, I set the tree on fire, consuming all the presents and creating the mess that Dad is examining. Gun control was also part of the public safety program, and here Mayor Zeidler even enlisted the Lone Ranger to help deliver the message. Public safety became a crusade of Frank Zeidler's for another reason. He traveled to Nevada to witness the detonation of a bomb, and it made a tremendous impression upon him, making him very aware of his responsibilities as mayor. This was the Cold War, and due to its large manufacturing base, he believed that Milwaukee was a prime target. He even overcame his aversion to flying so he could study evacuation routes. Dad became a recognized leader in civil defense planning, testifying before congressional committees in Washington. In the city were signed evacuation routes, shelters in public buildings, duck and cover drills in schools, and steel identification bracelets that all Zeidlers wore, and I think Mom has hers on here. But for Milwaukee today, a lasting impact of Frank Zeidler's 12 years as mayor was his aggressive program of land annexation that doubled the size of the city. Deeds for land were transferred to the city as recorded in this photograph. Why? There were several goals. One was to create new neighborhoods to alleviate inner city crowding and provide housing for those displaced by urban renewal. Another was to keep affluent citizens in the city. A third was that Milwaukee's industrial base needed the opportunity to grow and to modernize, and growth within the city would keep the jobs and the tax base from private industry as a city resource. More land was needed to achieve these goals, and the city needed to grow to prosper. Milwaukee's most potent weapon to attract areas to annex was the promise of excellent city services, especially water, but also infrastructure improvements like these at 76th and Appleton Avenue. But for Frank Zeidler, annexation was also a part of the civil defense strategy. Dispersing residential, commercial, and industrial sites through planning and zoning meant that enemy bombs could do less damage. So between 1948 and 1960, Milwaukee doubled in size to more than 95 square miles. Dad's vision was for one cohesive municipal government with a diverse population and a strong economic base. While that wasn't fully realized, in 1960, due to the success of annexation, Milwaukee's population was at an all-time high of more than 740,000 residents. Frank Zeidler was a visionary leader and not just a caretaker mayor. For all the improvements, expansion, and modernization of Milwaukee, probably the most admired characteristic of Dad's administration is summed up in the words clean government. This photograph was taken during the 1956 campaign, and clean government was certainly a theme. He was unfailingly honest and above corruption, and even his political opponents knew it. Dad said that Milwaukeeans want their representatives to come into office poor and leave penniless. I don't know about poor and penniless, but I do know that Frank Zeidler wasn't in public service for what it could provide him or his family. The other overriding characteristic of my father's tenure as mayor is that he consistently championed equity and diversity, and I am very proud of that. Frank Zeidler left office in April of 1960. As the sign on City Hall indicated, there was a civic tribute to him, and I think also to our mother. Agnes was a full partner, whether at official functions like this hospital celebration, welcoming celebrity visitors such as Eleanor Roosevelt. She also visited patients at the Veterans Home, took her Girl Scout troops caroling, served as PTA president, worked with the League of Women Voters and Church Women United. She canvassed door to door for the March of Dimes, while Dad gave visibility to the same charity another way. Whether it was appearing at civic and community functions or taking Red Cross first aid training, Mom was a great asset. She could even usually coax her kids into smiling for a camera, even though they knew they'd be teased at school when the picture appeared in the newspaper. And frankly, some of those pictures are pretty embarrassing. This one appeared in National Geographic. Or worse, this one from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel on the morning after the '56 election, when the paper wanted a picture and the kids were late for school. But Mom was warm, positive, generous, approachable, and smart. She was another pair of eyes and ears for Dad, and she ran his campaign office. They also shared responsibility at home. Dad astonished people frequently by answering the front door wearing one of Mom's aprons over his suit pants and white shirt because he was doing housework. And I wish I had a picture of that. Frank Zeidler was 47 years old when he chose not to seek re-election. He said he was tired, yet as a private citizen, he didn't stop serving this city or being a champion for the causes he cared about. He taught us about commitment that included persistence, loyalty, courage, and selflessness. Dad, here at the grave of Eugene V. Debs, remained committed to the Socialist Party with its ideals of economic and social justice and world peace, the ideals that inspired both of our parents in the 1930s. He spoke at the Socialist Party's 100th anniversary, aware that he had paid a personal price for his allegiance. For one thing, it cost both my mother and my father employment opportunities after 1960. But these were goals not to abandon, but to continually strive for. Frank and Agnes Zeidler were committed to Milwaukee to work to make this the best possible community for all citizens. And that meant commitment to the city's social, political, civic, and religious organizations. Dad never gave up his support of the labor movement in this photograph with President Harry Truman on Labor Day, 1956. And in this one, 40 years later, with my sister Dorothy, a union member, at Labor Day, 1996. He appeared every year at the commemoration of the Bayview Massacre to honor the workers killed in the struggle for the 8-hour day. He supported the International Institute, whose work furthers appreciation and understanding of others. For decades, he chaired the local United Nations chapter as a way to pursue world peace. He was proud of Milwaukee institutions like the Turners and joined in their celebrations. He was an active member of the West Division Alumni Association until the end, and he enjoyed community events such as German Day. This is not a comprehensive list. There are more organizations, the Interfaith Council for one, the World Federalists for another, the Public Enterprise Committee. I just can't begin to name them all. Commitment to Milwaukee also meant commitment to their neighborhood. They lived in the same near North Side house for more than 60 years because it fit their vision of a future Milwaukee. That vision is one with racial and economic harmony, but it's also a vision of an urban community that works. That neighborhood still has easy access to public transportation. It's located to take advantage of nearly a dozen parks and playgrounds. The library branch is a block away. The fire and police station's not much further. My parents never gave up their dream for Milwaukee. And so in 1960, Mom and Dad joined with neighbors to form the North Central Community Council, which still meets today and works on behalf of their neighborhood. And finally, commitment to Milwaukee meant commitment to family. Perhaps a few of you know that the home my parents lived in was owned by my grandfather, Michael Zeidler, until his death in 1970. The rent that my parents paid ensured that Grandpa had a steady income until well into his 90s. But as public parents, my father and mother had their challenges. When we were small, all of us at times thought we weren't getting enough attention from them. They were busy with public duties, and there were 6 of us after all. That was quite a group. So a few years after this picture was taken, Anita, Mary, and I went with Mom and Dad to the opening of a new parking lot. After the ribbon cutting, lots of kids got in line to get Dad's autograph, and so we thought we'd pull a trick on him. We each got in line and handed him a piece of paper for an autograph, very sure he'd never recognize his own daughters. He signed it without looking up, and I walked away gleeful that we finally had proof that Dad was too busy to notice us. And then I looked at my paper, and it said, "To Jeanette from her pa." Same with Nita's and Mary's. The fact is that Dad did find time for his children, whether it was taking them to public events, here's Anita at the stock car races, or playing the piano and singing songs from the Pogo book, making up stories for bedtime, walking to the park for baseball, or studying motors with Mike. There were family outings to the library, or helping Clara with math at the dining room table. Our parents were involved with each of us. This dining room table, by the way, later became Dad's major workplace at home for many decades as he wrote speeches and lectures, decided labor disputes, and engaged in his extensive network of correspondence. The home at 2921 North 2nd Street welcomed strangers, welcomed friends, and especially welcomed the extended family network. These are some of the Zeidler children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Nieces, nephews, cousins, all were important to Mom and Dad, and family was not limited by blood. This photograph was taken at the celebration of my parents' 65th wedding anniversary. A remarkable thing about them is that they found ideals which served them well for more than 65 years. They were always constant, whether those values were in vogue or not. They are values of which I am proud because they are a blueprint for positive change, for promoting human progress, as Dad would say. So, one of my favorite photographs from our family album is this photograph of my father taken about 1948. He's the one holding the glass of milk for this toast, not beer. I like it because it is a symbol of commitment to your beliefs, to being different if you need to be, but to also joining with your friends and neighbors in a common effort. Dad did not allow ideology to prevent collaboration, compromise, and progress. So I'm going to end with 2 quotes from Dad that sum up his philosophy and have meaning today. The first is about socialism, a word that is too often used negatively. Dad describes socialism in this way. Socialism believes that people working together for a common good can produce a greater benefit both for society and for the individual than can a society in which everyone is shrewdly seeking their own self-interest. I just don't see that as negative. I think that is a very positive outlook. But Dad also commented on life. A successful life, he said, opposes militarism, destruction of civil rights, and despoilation of the planet. So I think he had a successful life. So rather than close with that wonderful photograph of Dad, I'm going to close with this 1967 snapshot of him running on the track in Lake Park, because that's what he inspires us to do. Just keep moving, working to advance human progress, one community at a time, even when the odds are against you, like when you run the track in a suit and tie and street shoes. Thank you.
Okay. You were great. Thank you, Jeanne. Many thanks to Jeanne for continuing to give us inspiration, and to Frank Zeidler for continuing to give us inspiration. That was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. What a perfect way to celebrate his 100th birthday. Thanks to all of you for joining us. It was a remarkable evening, great history, and it warmed the heart. Thank you. Thanks to the Milwaukee Public Library and to Milwaukee Public Television as well.